They called it one of the worst fire seasons Los Angeles had seen in decades. Flames rolled over the hillsides like an army in motion. Orange walls devouring eucalyptus groves, palm fronds sparking like fireworks, the air thick with the bitter scent of ash. Entire neighborhoods went dark as power lines fell, their silence broken only by the distant thunder of helicopters dumping water into a blaze that never seemed to end. By the time dawn broke on the third day, more than 200 homes were gone. Schools, businesses, entire blocks reduced to blackened skeletons of wood and steel. Families stood on curbsides staring at the rubble that had once been kitchens, nurseries, living rooms. Some clutched photographs that had survived in half-burned frames. Others held nothing at all. And yet amid all this ruin, something stood untouched, on the edge of the fire zone, where the suburbs give way to scrubland and winding roads. There was a small parish. Most Angelenos had never heard of it. St. Jude's, a squat stucco church with a cracked parking lot and a few faded statues tucked into alcoves. It had always been small, serving mostly immigrant families who had drifted too far from downtown to find comfort in the larger cathedrals. That week, St. Jude's should have been gone. The fire maps showed the flames passing directly through its plot of land. Firefighters later admitted they didn't even try to defend it. "Too far gone," they said. "Not a chance." And yet, when the smoke finally cleared, when the embers cooled to dust and the ash lay ankle-deep in the gutters, the church was a ruin, yes. Its roof sagged, windows shattered, pews reduced to blackened frames. But one thing remained. In the courtyard, standing exactly where it had been for more than 70 years, was the statue. A 6-foot-tall figure of the Virgin Mary, carved in pale stone, hands folded in prayer. Not a crack on her face, not a scorch on her robe. Around her, the earth was charred black. Plants had been reduced to brittle husks. A wooden bench a few feet away had collapsed into ash. Yet she stood, pristine, untouched, as if the fire itself had passed around her. And it wasn't just her survival. Witnesses who came that morning swore they saw something else. The sunlight caught her stone robe and made it glow faintly, almost golden, against the ruin. Some said it was a trick of the smoke. Others said it was a sign. Father Miguel Herrera was the first to see her. At 56, Miguel had served as parish priest for nearly 2 decades. He'd buried the old and baptized the young. He'd listened to confessions that were more silence than words. He had also watched the church shrink. Families leaving for bigger cities, Sunday attendance thinning year after year. He had wondered more than once if God still listened to this little corner of the city. That morning, he walked up the cracked path to the courtyard, his shoes sinking in the soot. His heart ached at the sight of his church, roof gone, cross twisted, holy books, nothing but ash. But when his gaze lifted to the statue, his breath caught. She stood there exactly as she had the day he first arrived. Eyes lowered, mantle drawn across her shoulders, serenity carved into stone. Only now, behind her, the landscape looked like the end of the world. Miguel fell to his knees before he even realized it. Not out of choice, not even out of habit. Out of something deeper, out of the impossibility of what his eyes told him. Within hours, word spread. Parishioners came first, crossing police tape, carrying bottles of water and masks against the still smoking air. Then came neighbors, reporters, curious strangers. They all stood in a circle around the courtyard, whispering as if afraid to break the silence. Some crossed themselves. Others simply stared. "How?" they asked. "Why?" The fire marshal shrugged. "Sometimes flames jump," he offered. Sometimes the wind shifts. But no one truly believed it. Not after seeing the scorched earth forming a ring around the pedestal, as though something had drawn a line the flames could not cross. For the faithful, there was no question. It was a miracle. For skeptics, it was an anomaly. For Father Miguel, it was a wound reopening. Because he knew something no one else did. This wasn't the first time the statue had survived disaster. Years ago, in a flood that should have swept her away, she had remained standing while everything around her washed downhill. Before that, in an earthquake that cracked foundations across the neighborhood, her base had not shifted. And now, fire itself had failed to touch her. Miguel pressed his palm to the cool stone and whispered a prayer. Not a prayer of gratitude, though his lips formed the words, but of fear. Because if the statue had truly been spared for a reason, then that reason had yet to be revealed. As night fell, the crowds thinned. The news vans packed up. The police tape fluttered in the cooling wind. But Father Miguel stayed in the courtyard, sitting on the blackened ground before the statue. In the dim light, her eyes seemed to glisten, her lips almost curved in a faint, unreadable smile. And for the first time in years, Miguel felt the old weight of mystery press against his chest. The kind of weight you can't reason with. The kind that asks not for answers, but for faith. He closed his eyes. In the stillness, he thought he heard something. Not a voice exactly, more like the faint toll of a bell, 3 times, low and slow. He opened his eyes, heart pounding. The courtyard was empty. The air was still. There had never been a bell at St. Jude's, not in all the years he'd served there. And yet, the sound lingered in his bones. By morning, the parishioners would return. The news would spread further. Some would bring flowers. Others would bring questions. And in time, Miguel would be forced to face what he had long avoided. The truth of where the statue had come from, and the vow hidden in its stone foundation. Because the fire was only the beginning. The miracle was only the surface. And beneath the statue of Mary, the one the flames could not touch, was a secret that had waited 70 years to be uncovered. When the fire crews cleared out and the reporters packed their vans, Father Miguel remained. He sat at his desk in the rectory, the smell of smoke still heavy in the air, staring at a blank page in his journal. He had always written after disasters, after funerals, after storms, after the earthquake of 1994 that shook half the parish into rubble. But this time, the words would not come. Everyone else seemed to know what to call it. Miracle. A sign from heaven. Proof that Mary still watches us. But Miguel hesitated. He had studied theology in Rome. He had written essays on the difference between divine intervention and coincidence. He had lectured seminarians on the danger of claiming miracles too quickly. He had told widows gently that sometimes bad things simply happen, and we do not always get answers. And now, here he was, facing the one event he could not explain away. The parishioners had no such doubts. By the end of the week, they were streaming back to St. Jude's courtyard. Elderly women with rosaries dangling from their hands. Families who had lost their homes but still brought flowers, placing them gently at the statue's feet. Children standing barefoot in the ash, whispering prayers. They called her La Señora que no se quema, the lady who wouldn't burn. Some knelt for hours in silence. Others sang hymns until their voices cracked. One man, whose house had been reduced to cinders, walked circles around the statue every evening, whispering, "Gracias, gracias." For a moment, it looked as if faith had returned to the parish. The pews were gone, the roof collapsed. But people still came, more than Miguel had seen in years. The statue had become their altar, their confessional, their sanctuary. But faith is never simple. Not everyone saw the untouched figure as a blessing. A small but loud group gathered at the diner on Maple Avenue, muttering over black coffee. "It's stone. Stone doesn't burn like wood. Wind must have shifted. Coincidence, that's all." A local contractor swore he could prove it scientifically. Another man claimed the priest had staged the whole thing to bring life back into a dying parish. By the second week, the town was split clean down the middle. Believers and skeptics glaring at each other across checkout lines at the grocery store. For Miguel, the division cut deeper than any sermon could heal. He could not deny the sight of the untouched statue. He had felt its cold stone beneath his trembling hand. But he also knew what it meant if he proclaimed it a miracle. If he stood in the ruins of St. Jude's and declared, "Heaven has spoken." What if he was wrong? What if he misled them? His sleep grew restless. The night smelled of ash. And always, when he closed his eyes, he saw her, the statue, standing unburned, glowing faintly in the smoky dark. And that glow, it was no longer just in his dreams. One evening, around midnight, Miguel walked the courtyard alone. The ground was still scorched black, though volunteers had begun sweeping paths through the soot. The statue stood at the center as always, pale and silent. But then, he noticed it, a faint shimmer around her mantle. Not bright, not blazing, just a soft radiance, like moonlight gathered on stone. He rubbed his eyes, convinced it was fatigue. But when he looked again, it remained. He stepped closer. The air grew cooler. For a moment, he thought he smelled something. Jasmine. Faint and fleeting, impossible in the burned courtyard. Then it was gone. The glow faded. The night returned to stillness. Miguel stood there for a long time, heart pounding, palms sweating against his cassock. He wanted to call it imagination. He wanted to blame the smoke, the moon, his weary mind. But deep down, he knew this was no trick of the senses. And he knew something else. This was not the first time the statue had defied destruction. He remembered the flood in the 1970s, when a flash storm sent torrents of water down the hillside, sweeping cars off the road and swallowing basements whole. The rectory had filled with 2 feet of water. Hymnals floated like lost ships across the nave. But when the waters receded, the statue was still there, dry, untouched, as if the flood had split in two around her. He remembered the earthquake. The parish walls cracked, windows shattered. Even the crucifix above the altar fell, its wooden arm broken clean off. But the statue in the courtyard? She hadn't shifted an inch. Not even dust had gathered on her robe. And now fire. Miguel pressed his hands together, staring at her stone face in the dark. He felt something he had not felt in years, not pure faith, not comfort, but fear. Because if she had survived all this, then surely it meant something. And he wasn't sure he wanted to know what. The next Sunday, he tried to speak. The courtyard was packed, parishioners standing shoulder to shoulder, eyes on him as if waiting for him to confirm what they already believed. He opened his Bible, hands trembling. "My brothers and sisters," he began, "we have seen something extraordinary, something we cannot deny. A murmur swept through the crowd, hope, expectation. But, his voice cracked, we must be cautious. We must not leap too quickly to call this miracle. The air shifted. Faces fell. A woman in the front row lowered her candle. A child frowned. Miguel swallowed hard. I ask you to pray. Pray not for signs, but for understanding. Pray for the wisdom to see what God asks of us now. The crowd dispersed quietly after. Some bowed their heads, others whispered in frustration. A few left shaking their heads. That night, Miguel sat in the rectory again, his journal open before him. Still blank, still no words, only questions. He knew the parishioners wanted certainty. They wanted him to declare the truth, to give them something solid to cling to. But he couldn't, because every time he closed his eyes, he remembered the glow, the jasmine, the bell tolling in the smoke. And worse, he remembered something he had nearly forgotten. A story from the parish's past. A secret whispered by his predecessor on his deathbed. A warning tied not just to the statue's presence, but to its very foundation. Miguel pushed the memory aside, but it clung to him like smoke. The statue was not just surviving. It was waiting. And what it waited for would not be coincidence. Long before the flames licked the hills of Los Angeles, long before Father Miguel ever laid eyes on her, the statue had already traveled a great distance. The year was 1951. The city was smaller then. Freeways had not yet carved the landscape into concrete rivers. Los Angeles was still a patchwork of barrios and farmland, places where immigrants from Mexico and Central America built lives with calloused hands and stubborn hope. It was in that year that a crate arrived at the port of Los Angeles. Heavy, unmarked, its board stamped only with the faint words, Envío Especial Veracruz. The parish priest at the time, Father Esteban, had not ordered it. No one in the parish council knew where it came from. Yet the shipping papers bore the church's name, written in looping script. Inside was the statue. 6 feet of pale stone, simple yet hauntingly beautiful. The Virgin Mary, hands folded, mantle drawn over her shoulders, her eyes lowered in sorrow, yet touched by serenity, as though she saw everything at once. The grief of the world, and the promise beyond it. The sculptor's name was nowhere on the papers, but rumors followed the crate across the ocean. Some said it was the work of a mason in Oaxaca, a man who had once carved saints for cathedrals, but had fallen silent for years. He claimed one night the Virgin herself appeared in a dream, holding his hand, guiding the chisel. For 3 weeks, he worked in silence. Who wrote it? No one could say for certain. Some claimed it was the Ochoa family, who had lost 2 sons to war and prayed for the return of the third. Others swore it was Doña Isabela, an immigrant widow who raised her children selling tamales in the market and believed Mary had preserved them through sickness. Still others said the sculptor himself had sent the vow, tucked into the crate like a seed. The note was sealed with mortar, hidden forever beneath the base. And yet, somehow, word of it spread. And as the years passed, so did the stories. In 1959, when a brush fire roared down the hills, neighbors swore the flames stopped just short of the parish grounds. In 1971, when the Silmar earthquake toppled freeways and flattened hospitals, the parish cracked, but did not collapse. Parishioners said they saw dust rise in the courtyard, but when it cleared, the statue still stood, untouched. In 1987, a boy no older than 7 wandered from his home and vanished into the busy streets. Search parties combed every block. Hours later, he was found sitting quietly at the statue's base, smiling, unharmed. "The lady held my hand," he said. His parents never forgot it. And now, after the fire of 2024, the statue had once again defied destruction. These weren't just coincidences, the faithful argued. They were echoes of something larger, of the way Mary had appeared across the world in moments of crisis. In Guadalupe, she came as a mother to a peasant, Juan Diego. Her image burned into his tilma in colors no brush could paint. In Fatima, she appeared to children, warning of wars and promising peace if the world prayed. In Lourdes, she revealed healing waters that still draw pilgrims by the millions. And here, in Los Angeles of all places, she stood as stone, refusing to yield to flood, to quake, to fire. For skeptics, it was folklore at best. For believers, it was proof that the same presence that had walked fields in Portugal, mountains in Mexico, and grottos in France was here, watching over their little parish on the edge of the city. Father Miguel, leafing through old parish records late at night, saw the pattern forming. Every priest before him had made notes. Short lines in fragile handwriting. Water rose but did not touch her. Quake cracked walls, but she remains. The child says she spoke to him. Each entry ended the same way. Mysterium. Mystery. The record spoke of the vow too, not in detail, but in whispers. A promise was made. We are bound by it. Bound by what? Bound to whom? Miguel pressed his hand against the cool stone one evening, staring at her carved face in the moonlight. He thought of the sculptor's dream. He thought of the vow beneath the base. And he thought of the disasters that had passed like waves breaking against an immovable shore. The parishioners wanted certainty. The skeptics wanted explanations. But Miguel felt only the weight of the past pressing forward. Because if the statue had stood through all these trials, if she had truly been spared for a reason, then the reason was not yet revealed. And the vow beneath the stone was not yet fulfilled. The first fire had passed, leaving ash and ruin across Los Angeles. But the city was not done burning. By late summer, the hills dried again, brittle grass crunching underfoot, the air heavy with heat. One spark was all it would take. The firefighters warned the parish early. "If it flares up again, we won't be able to save this place," one captain said, his helmet tucked under his arm. "The wind carries it too fast. If another wall of flame comes down this ridge, St. Jude's is gone." Miguel nodded, his stomach sinking. He had heard those words before. The same certainty spoken by men who had watched neighborhoods swallowed whole in minutes. Logic said they were right. Yet every night, he still found himself staring at the unburned statue, her pale stone seeming almost brighter in the dark. 2 weeks later, the fire returned. The sky bruised red at noon, ash falling like snow. Sirens wailed down the freeways, helicopters thundered overhead, and a wave of smoke rolled down the valley. By evening, the flames were visible from the parish courtyard, a jagged orange line devouring the hillside. The order came quickly: evacuate. Families packed their cars, headlights weaving through smoke. Some parishioners begged Miguel to leave with them, but others stayed, drawn by something stronger than fear. By the time night fell, nearly 50 people stood in the courtyard, circling the statue. Some knelt with rosaries. Others lifted candles, their flames trembling against the choking wind. Mothers pressed children to their chests. Elderly men whispered prayers in Spanish, voices raw with both desperation and reverence. Miguel tried to lead them. He began with the words he had spoken his entire priesthood. "Hail Mary, full of grace." But his voice cracked, carried away by the roar of fire pressing closer. And then the first strange thing happened. The embers came. They swirled in spirals, glowing red as they fell from the sky. Ash and sparks rained across rooftops, igniting dry branches, burning through plastic tarps. But as they drifted toward the statue, the wind shifted. Again and again, sparks curved midair, spinning sideways, landing harmlessly on the blackened ground. Not one touched her. A boy, no more than 6, pointed upward with wide eyes. "She's walking," he whispered. His mother pulled him close, shushing him. But his small finger trembled toward the flames. And some swore they saw it too, a figure moving in the firelight. Not tall, not shadow, but luminous, like a woman in blue robes gliding along the ridge. She walked with calm steps, even as the flames leapt high around her. Her mantle shimmered, stitched with starlight, and though the wind howled, the fire bent away from her path. "She's here," an old woman gasped, clutching her rosary so tightly the beads cut into her skin. "La Dama Azul," the lady in blue. Miguel's heart thudded. He wanted to dismiss it, to blame smoke and fear, but the boy's words echoed. "She's walking." The ground shook as a tree collapsed nearby, flames consuming its trunk. A wave of heat swept the courtyard, hot enough to sting skin. Yet within the circle around the statue, the air shifted strangely, cooler, crisp, as if the night itself wrapped around them like a shield. The people felt it. They murmured louder, prayers rising above the roar of fire. Miguel stared at the statue. In the flickering light, her eyes seemed almost alive. Lowered yet watchful, serene yet commanding. He felt his doubts crack under the weight of that gaze. For years, he had spoken of mystery with caution. But this defied the words he had built his life upon. Still, he could not bring himself to say the word miracle. Not yet. The fire raged through the night, but by dawn, the flames had skirted the parish grounds entirely. Blackened earth surrounded the church, but the courtyard remained untouched. Volunteers walked in stunned silence, brushing ash from their hair, clutching one another. The statue stood, white against the smoke-stained horizon. As Miguel paced the courtyard, something caught his eye at the base of the pedestal. A fissure, thin at first, then widening as he crouched closer. The mortar had cracked. A corner of the stone foundation was peeling away, exposing the faint glint of metal. He brushed the soot with trembling fingers. There, beneath layers of crumbling cement, was the edge of a tin box, the vow. His breath caught. He remembered the old records, the whispers of his predecessors. A promise was made. We are bound by it. The box seemed ready to break free, as though the fire itself had not destroyed it, but revealed it. Miguel stood frozen, the murmurs of the crowd still thick in the air. He wanted to pry it out, to see what lay within. But some instinct, fear, reverence, or something else, kept his hand still. Not yet. The statue had survived again. The flames pushed back, the lady in blue seen walking the ridges. And now, the ground itself had given up a secret buried 70 years ago. The people thought the miracle had ended with the fire. Miguel knew it had only begun. morning after the fire, the parish courtyard felt different. Not just quiet, but charged, as if the air carried an aftertaste of something unseen. The statue stood as always, calm, unmarked, a sentinel untouched by flame. But all eyes were drawn not to her marble face, but to the crack at her base. By midday, the townspeople gathered again. Miguel tried to wave them off, insisting the damage should be examined privately by masons or engineers. But word had spread too fast. The statue revealed something. Curiosity outweighed caution. With the sun high overhead, Miguel knelt beside the fissure. The tin edge gleamed faintly in the light, like a coin half buried in soil. He hesitated, glancing back at the crowd. Dozens of eyes, waiting, expectant, hungry. Finally, he pressed his fingers against the weakened mortar and pried. The stone crumbled easily, as though eager to surrender its secret. Slowly, he pulled the box free. A small tin, dented, blackened with age, yet intact. Gasps rippled through the courtyard. Some crossed themselves. Others leaned forward, breathless. Miguel held the box with trembling hands. His throat tightened. This was the vow. The same one whispered about in the archives. The same promise hinted in half-written notes from priests long gone. He lifted the lid. Inside lay a single sheet of folded paper, yellowed, edges brittle. Carefully, he opened it. The ink had faded, but the words remained clear, written in neat, careful Spanish script. "If you save our children, you will remain here forever." The courtyard went utterly still. No coughs, no murmurs, not even the wind through the burned trees. The Ochoa family name was signed at the bottom. Miguel's mind reeled. He knew the story in fragments. The Ochoas had fled violence in Mexico, arriving in Los Angeles with little more than faith and hunger. Records said they nearly lost 2 children to illness, but the children survived, miraculously, against every doctor's prediction. And now, decades later, their vow had resurfaced. "This is why," whispered an elderly woman, clutching her rosary. "This is why the fire could not touch her. The promise still binds us." Another voice, sharper, rose from the back. "Or maybe it's just coincidence. Fires are strange. Some things burn, some don't. Don't turn this into superstition." The divide cracked open right there in the courtyard. For every believer who saw divine protection, there was a skeptic who muttered about wind patterns, about heat shadows, about engineering anomalies in stone. But then the strangeness began. That very night, as Miguel locked the parish doors, he heard it. A low, resonant sound rolling down from the courtyard. A bell tolling, slow, heavy, unmistakable. He froze. The church had no bell. It had been removed decades ago, sold when the parish could no longer afford repairs. And yet, the sound echoed, deep enough to vibrate in his ribs. The next morning, others claimed to have heard it too. Always 3 tolls, always at dusk. Then came the lights. The parish was old, the wiring older, but even skeptics struggled to explain how the lamps inside flickered only when prayers were said aloud. When silence returned, so did steady light. Electricians checked the panels, replaced the fuses, rewired half the circuit. The phenomenon continued. Meanwhile, survivors of the fire began to speak. Not in public, not at first, but in whispers, in kitchens, in confessionals. "I saw her," one man told Miguel, eyes wide. "In the smoke, a woman in blue. She led me down the hillside, showed me where the air was clear." Another survivor described waking up after collapsing from heat, a hand lifting him. But when I opened my eyes, no one was there. Only the fire behind me and the path ahead. One woman, trembling as she clutched her daughter, swore her child had spoken in her sleep during the evacuation. The lady says not to be afraid. She's here. The stories multiplied. They passed through town like sparks on wind. Some scoffed, others swore oaths by them. Miguel struggled in silence. The vow in his hands, the tolling bell in his ears, the glowing figure seen by survivors. It was all too much to dismiss. And yet, the weight of responsibility crushed him. To proclaim it miracle was to risk ridicule, division, perhaps even desecration. To deny it was to betray what his own eyes and ears had witnessed. By the end of the week, the town had split cleanly. On one side, those who gathered every evening at the statue, candles flickering in rows, prayers rising with conviction. To them, the Ochoa vow explained everything. The parish was spared because it was promised. The lady was protecting them still. On the other side, skeptics who muttered about psychology, mass hysteria, and the danger of myth. "You want miracles?" One man sneered at the market. "Wait until the next fire comes. Stone doesn't burn easy, that's all it is." But the skeptics avoided the courtyard at night. None admitted it, but everyone knew. Even they had heard the bell toll. And Miguel? One evening, he stood alone before the statue, the tin box at his feet, the vow folded in his hand. The air was cool despite the lingering heat of the season. Ash drifted lazily, catching in the folds of her carved robe. He whispered into the night, "Why now? Why show this to me?" The statue said nothing. Yet the silence was not empty. It pressed against him, heavy, insistent. The vow was clear. "If you save our children, you will remain here forever." But what did forever mean? And what would happen if someone tried to break that promise? The fire had spared them once. Would it do so again? Or was this vow a warning? One they had yet to understand. Father Miguel had always known faith could divide. He had preached to half-empty pews, counseled parishioners who left when prayers went unanswered, seen marriages crumble despite rosaries prayed nightly. But he had never felt faith tear at his own chest the way it did now. The vow in the tin box haunted him. "If you save our children, you will remain here forever." What did forever mean? A lifetime? A generation? Until the last stone of the parish crumbled? Or did it mean something deeper, something binding beyond human hands? He wanted to speak, to stand at the altar and proclaim it miracle, divine proof. But his training pulled him back. Coincidence, superstition. Don't make promises you can't defend. And yet, how could he ignore the tolling bells, the flickering lights, the voices of survivors who swore the lady in blue walked among the flames? The tension stretched beyond the parish walls. Developers arrived, their eyes set not on the statue, but on the blackened land surrounding it. "Prime property," one said, flipping through glossy renderings. "A cultural center, a plaza, a new start for this community." The council meetings were quiet at first, then contentious. To build, they said, the statue had to move. It would be preserved, of course, set in a safer, more accessible plaza. They even offered to place her at the very entrance, under glass, with lights to shine day and night. "It's respectful," one developer insisted. "We're not destroying her, we're honoring her." But the town did not agree. Some nodded reluctantly, desperate for jobs and tourism. Others shook their heads with dread. "She doesn't want to be moved," whispered old Senora Alvarez, her wrinkled hands trembling around her rosary. "She's been here since the Ochoas prayed their vow. You break it, you break us." The decision was made anyway. The statue would be relocated. The first attempt came on a bright morning. A crane rolled into the courtyard, its steel arm towering above the small church. Workers in neon vests fastened straps around the base. Miguel stood with a small crowd at a distance, heart pounding. He had begged the council to reconsider, but they had waved him off with polite smiles. The crane engine roared. Cables tightened. The statue didn't move. The operator frowned, pressed the controls harder. The cables strained until they sang like wires about to snap. The tension gauge climbed into the red. Then, with a sharp crack, one strap snapped free and whipped against the ground, missing a worker by inches. The operator cut power, shaking his head. "Bad rigging," he muttered. But Miguel noticed his hands were trembling as he lit a cigarette. The second attempt came 3 days later. A larger crew arrived, this time with winches and reinforced slings. They worked at dawn, hoping fewer eyes would watch. Miguel was there anyway, clutching the folded vow in his pocket. This time, the straps held. The winches growled. Slowly, impossibly, the statue shifted half an inch. A gasp rippled through the workers. Then, without warning, the ground beneath the machine shook. One worker stumbled backward. Another screamed. The winch bucked, snapping its hooks like brittle twigs. The operator fell hard, clutching his arm. By the time the ambulance arrived, rumors had already begun. The lady struck him. The third attempt came under secrecy. The developers, now embarrassed by the failures, called in a specialist team from out of state. They arrived with precision equipment, whispering about faulty soil and outdated methods. They set up quietly at night, floodlights cutting through smoke. Miguel hadn't been told, but he woke at 3 a.m. with a start, his chest tight. Something pulled him from bed. He hurried to the courtyard, just in time to see the floodlights flicker. The machines rumbled, their hydraulic arms lowering into place. Workers secured cables. The leader barked orders. At 3:17, the statue lifted, just slightly, no more than the width of a coin. And then, every light on the site went black. Shouts rang out. Workers scrambled. The only illumination came from the moon, pale and cold. And in that silence, Miguel swore he heard it again. 3 deep tolls, rolling from nowhere, vibrating in the earth beneath his shoes. The workers left before dawn, muttering about faulty generators, about bad luck, about unions and contracts. None returned the next day. That night, Miguel couldn't sleep. He paced the rectory until exhaustion overtook him. And then, just before dawn, he dreamed. He stood in the same courtyard, but it was different. The land was scorched, the sky dark, the statue glowing faintly in the ash. And beside her stood a woman. Her robe was blue, stitched with stars. Her mantle flowed in a wind he could not feel. Her face was gentle, sorrowful, yet commanding. Miguel fell to his knees. His throat tightened. "Who are you?" he whispered, though he already knew. Her voice came soft, like a breeze that brushed the soul rather than the ear. "Do not move me. I was placed where prayers were answered." He wept in the dream, tears cutting through the ash on his cheeks. When he woke, the clock read 3:33 a.m. His pillow was damp with tears. His heart, for the first time in years, felt light. By morning, the doubt that had weighed him for so long was gone. The vow was true. The miracle was real. And the lady would not be moved. The fourth attempt came without fanfare. No announcements, no permits nailed to bulletin boards. Only the low rumble of engines rolling in before dawn. Miguel felt it before he saw it. The ground trembled faintly beneath his shoes as he walked toward the parish gates. Beyond the blackened trees, floodlights flickered. The developers had returned. One last time. This time, they brought everything. 2 cranes, a team of specialists, even a fire marshal on standby. Their plan was simple. Free the foundation, lift the statue onto steel plates, and move it by force if necessary. Miguel approached, heart pounding. "Please," he begged the foreman. "You don't understand. This isn't stone, it's a vow." The foreman barely looked at him. "Father, with respect, I don't deal in vows. I deal in tons. And this statue weighs just under 2. It's moving today." Workers lowered drills against the foundation. The metallic whine pierced the dawn. Dust rose in pale clouds. For a moment, it seemed the plan might succeed. Then came the wind. It whipped across the courtyard, sudden and sharp, scattering papers, slamming doors against walls. Workers shouted, gripping their helmets. The drills screeched, then fell silent, their bits spinning uselessly. And then, lightning. Not from clouds, not from storm, but from a clear, unbroken sky. A single bolt split the air, slamming into the earth less than 10 feet from the statue's base. The sound was deafening, a crack that rattled bones. Fire erupted in dry grass, flames coiling for only seconds before vanishing without smoke, without ash. Every machine shut down at once. Consoles blinked, alarms shrieked, then fell silent. The foreman shouted orders, but no one moved. Workers stared at the statue, untouched, her marble face glowing faintly in the light of dawn. "Pack it up," one operator muttered. His hands shook so badly he dropped his wrench. Another simply crossed himself and walked away. By mid-morning, the courtyard was empty. No trucks, no cranes, no drills. Only the deep ruts of tire tracks carved into the earth. And the statue, standing as she had always stood, arms open, eyes lowered. The people of the parish gathered that night. No flyers had been sent, no announcements made, but one by one they arrived. Families carried candles, children clutched flowers, old women brought rosaries. By dusk, the courtyard flickered with hundreds of tiny flames. Miguel stepped forward, his voice breaking as he addressed them, not from the pulpit, not behind the altar, but from the steps before the statue itself. "For years," he said, "I doubted. I thought faith was fragile, that it would crumble under fire, under fear. But this statue, this vow, has endured what we could not. And she has reminded us of something we forget too easily." He paused, his eyes wet. God keeps his promises. And sometimes he reminds us through a mother's mercy. The crowd bowed their heads. Tears streaked weathered cheeks. Some wept openly. Others simply stood in silence, listening, as if the very air carried meaning. From that night, the parish began to rebuild, not with bulldozers or contractors, but with hands and hearts. Men hauled stone. Women cooked meals for the workers. Children carried buckets of gravel up the hill. Slowly, walls rose again. Beams lifted into place, roofs hammered and sealed. And at the center of it all, untouched, unmovable, stood the Virgin Mary. Word spread beyond Los Angeles. First whispers, then articles, then news crews. Tourists arrived in trickles, then in streams. Some came to film, others to pray. Many simply stood in silence before the statue, waiting for something they couldn't name. One afternoon, a journalist leaned down to speak with a boy no older than 8. The child had survived the fire, carried from a burning house by his uncle. He still bore a faint scar on his arm, a mark of where flame had licked him before the rescue. "Why do you think the statue survived?" the journalist asked gently. The boy looked up, his eyes wide but steady. He whispered, as if repeating words too holy for shouting. "She told me the flames cannot touch what heaven has chosen." The words rippled through the crowd. Some crossed themselves, others wept. The journalist lowered his pen, unable to write. That night, Miguel stood at the parish door, watching as candles flickered in the courtyard. The statue glowed faintly in their light, her face calm, her gaze eternal. Later, an aerial drone captured footage of the parish for a news special. The rebuilt walls gleamed. The burned land beyond stretched black and scarred. But in the center, brilliant against the darkness, the statue shone. Not with candles, not with reflection, but with a faint, inexplicable radiance. And the question lingered, was it miracle or myth? No engineer could explain it. No skeptic could dismiss it. And no believer needed proof. The lady remained, exactly where prayers had once been answered, exactly where they still were. If this story touched you, subscribe and make sure to like the video. Until next time.